Is your partner resistant to PDA because they don't think it's evidence-based? Today I'm going to talk about 3 tips to support you in making progress in your home. So, excuse me. This is my second attempt at doing this live today. So before I dive into the content, can you guys let me know if you can hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up or something to let me know you can hear what I'm saying? I can hear. Okay, awesome. Round 2. Okay, for those of you, excuse me, who just joined, what we're talking about today is 3 tips to support you in making progress in your home when your partner is resistant to making a paradigm shift because PDA isn't evidence-based, okay? So there are 3 things that I want to support you in learning. So first, recognizing the source of resistance of your partner. Second, framing shifting things in your home as an experiment that is time-bound. And then third, collecting data for your own evidence on your own child in your own home. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is that it's absolutely and completely normal and typical for 2 partners in the home to not be on the same page and to be moving at different paces. This is most often because one parent is usually the lead parent, meaning they are the one who does the bulk of the caregiving and has been doing the nervous system accommodations intuitively, and the other partner often doesn't see the degree to which their child is disabled by their nervous system. Okay, so it says no sound again. Can people hear? Can you guys hear me? Oh my gosh. You can hear. Okay. My goodness, friends, what is happening today? Okay. Okay, so the first thing, recognize the source of resistance. The second thing, framing it as an experiment to collect your own data in a time-bound way. And then third, learning how to actually collect the data on 3 variables. Okay, so let's talk about number 1. Recognizing the source of resistance in your partner. And today we're only going to really dive into one of those sources of resistance, but you want to identify which it is because there are different approaches. Okay, so the first, and it looks like a person on the call already mentioned this, which is the neurotype of your partner. Okay, so a lot of times there are undiagnosed, unrecognized, distinct neurotypes going on in your family because this is a genetic thing, right? So often the partner who is resistant is resistant because of their neurotype, right? So if they are undiagnosed or unaware of the fact that they are PDA or pathologically demand avoidant themselves, they may be experiencing a loss of autonomy when you are presenting to them, like, we need to change our parenting, and they are neurocepting that you're putting yourself in a position of authority, and it's shutting down that possibility, okay? They could be non-PDA autistic and really attached to and needing as an access need more routine and structure and linear approaches, right? The second reason is because of childhood trauma and what it's bringing up for them in terms of resistance as they're implementing. And a lot of times this can be positive childhood experiences where it's like, we didn't do this way and it wasn't this hard. How could we possibly let our child get away with this? My parents raised me in a much more strict disciplinary way and we have a good relationship and it turned out great. Look at me, I'm successful. Second could be childhood trauma, which is going to be impacting the ability to implement some of these changes that you're doing in your home. Okay, but today we're going to talk about one specific source of resistance, and you might not know which of these things is what is preventing your partner from making progress. So number 3, which is needing more evidence, is what we're going to focus on today. And it might be something to try initially. And if this doesn't work, then you can go to the other explanations of like, maybe the source of my partner's resistance is their neurotype, in which case I need to give them more autonomy or reassurance with structure. Or it might be childhood, in which case that's a different conversation, right? But let's just talk about number 3, because this is a common source of resistance for parents, often dads who are more scientifically oriented. Maybe they're an engineer, maybe they're a scientist or a pediatrician themselves. And it's true that we just don't have a solid evidence base yet on pathological demand avoidance. What we have is a bunch of peer-reviewed articles in the UK that are debating the existence of PDA. So that's obviously not going to be convincing. So what we want to do is we want to start framing this scientifically as our own experiment in our homes with the ability to collect our own data. So the first part of it is an opportunity to just put boundaries around this, like saying, what if we simply did this different lowering demands, providing more autonomy, shifting the energy for 2 weeks and see what shifts? And we're going to talk about the see what shifts in the collecting data, and I'm going to talk to you about how to do that. Okay, let's give an example. This was something that came up yesterday in our live paradigm shift program, the theme of lying. Right? So lying can happen as a nervous system response of our PDA children and teens. It might be in the moment when they're caught doing something and they deny it. Like, I didn't do that. I didn't knock over my brother's Legos. I'm not the one who spilled the juice, because they don't want to clean it up. And then when you ask them about it, they likely shut down or double down on the lie. This can also happen not in the moment where, there's no reason for them to lie rationally. And you are, maybe they went to school all day and were internalizing their threat response and masking or hiding their threat response. And they come home to safety with you. And that is when the nervous system driven lying is coming out. Okay, so let's take 2 examples and how we can look at this from a neutral perspective as an experiment where you collect your own data. Okay, and this is a very difficult thing to do because lying is objectively, for the vast majority of us families and parents, not a value that we want to instill in our children. I think we can all agree on that. Okay, but let's say we have a child who is, they have trouble eating, like my son does, right? And when we ask them if they like, oops, that was my little Buddha structure. If they like what they're eating, we can observe that they don't like what they're eating, but they say, yeah, I like this, right? So it's like somewhat of an innocuous lie, but it's worrisome because we know that they're not telling the truth. Okay, so what are we going to want to do, or our partner going to want to do in those moments when it's not truthful? We want to correct them or say, I know you don't like it. It's okay to tell us the truth. Or, I can get you something else because I see that you don't like this food. We want to get them to tell us the truth, right? We want to teach them that skill. But what do we know about the logic of the PDA brain is that when we correct, when we sort of put ourselves in a position of authority and their survival brain neurocepts or subconsciously perceives that we're above them and deciding or pressuring them to do something, it is registering in the survival brain as danger or life threat, even if objectively to you as a parent, it's not, right? So knowing that the cost of correction of the child, of the lie, will actually put them further into their survival brain where they can't think rationally, learn, access empathy, or effectively communicate. And actually with the equalizing, where the PDA nervous system tries to get back to a place of equal to or above another person, they may even double down on the lie and be more likely to lie in response. Okay, so this is the nature and the logic of the PDA brain and nervous system. It just is, right? And we can know that, and your partner can know that. Like, that is how the brain and nervous system works. However, when it gets to the moment of not correcting the lie, that's where most parents get stuck, especially the partner who is not the lead parent. Okay, so if we, as the lead parent, which I was for a long time with my PDA son, go to our partner and say, hey, don't correct them, right? They're going to think to themselves, but it's my job as a parent to instill values and make sure that they're a good person, right? So it can feel insurmountable to be like, okay, I'm just going to let lying go in my family. So one of the things we can do to reach a compromise with our resistant partner is to say something like, what if we took 2 weeks and during this specific thing where the child is not telling the truth about what they like eating or not, we simply don't correct them. And let's see if anything shifts. Okay, so what might happen in those 2 weeks? And again, this is an experiment, meaning I don't know, the parents don't know, and the partner doesn't know. And we're open to different possibilities of like, we could be wrong, right? We could experiment with this and the lying gets worse, in which case you don't continue doing it, right? This is an experimental approach. But one of the things that often happens with kids, and this happens in my own home as well with lying, is instead of immediately correcting out of our own fear of like our child becoming a liar and a psychopath and not being independent, not being a good person, all the things, we can say, I'm going to take 2 weeks and just see what happens. And what often happens is the child will say, I don't like that. And you let it go. And maybe you even strew or leave out a food that you do know that they like. And it gets them back in their thinking brain, which is the part of the brain that they can actually think rationally. And they might say, oh, actually, I don't like this. I don't like this, right? But it takes them that moment to get back in their thinking brain in order to communicate the accurate truth, right? And what do those moments in the sacred pause of not correcting give both the lead parent and the non-lead parent or the resistant partner? They give you data, okay? So you can't see data and you can't see difference if you do the same thing over and over again, which is correction, right? Another possibility is that they don't come back and say, oh, actually, I didn't like that, right? But you might start to notice other data or other indicators, which we're going to talk about on non-verbally communicated indicators of the nervous system, basic needs access, and connection. Okay, so that's the next part of this talk. So that example is simply to show that like not correcting lying can feel insurmountable for families. And it makes sense because we're terrified that we're like creating a monster if we're not correcting, right? And we all have the value of wanting to raise honest and truthful humans. Okay? Another one, let's talk about another one. Eating at the table versus letting them eat where they want with an iPad. So many parents, myself included, have so much trouble with this. Why? Because we have a future fear. They're never going to learn to sit at the table. They're going to have bad habits, like they won't have someone to deliver their food in the future. I can't be their maid forever. They won't be part of society or independent. That's future, right? When we're trying to make these paradigm shifts or shifts in our home. especially with the partner who's like, I don't have evidence in the academic literature that this will actually work. So like, I can't make this shift, right? So let's take the eating at the table. So if we can do the first thing, which is frame it as an experiment to collect your own data in a time-bound way, then we can say, okay, listen, I hear you, I get it, but what if we just took 2 weeks or even just a week and we decided to let our child eat on the couch with an iPad because they're struggling to eat and they can't engage at the table anyways, and the data that we have is showing that what we are doing isn't working. Okay, fine, I'll experiment for 2 weeks and then observe. Do they eat more? Are there less meltdowns, right? Is there better communication? And we're going to put some like more granularity around that data. The third example is with homework, okay? So this is an example from my own life. Resistance to homework if they're in school, right? And this is a tricky one because a lot of times even when we say to a PDA child, fine, you don't have to do homework. I spoke to the teachers, we can lower the demand, it's fine. They still want to do it because of the like societal pressure of their school and all the other kids doing it. So this for the past year, last school year in 3rd grade, was an incredibly stressful thing because my son would get into cognitive loops, right? Where it's like he doesn't want to do the homework, but he wants to do the homework, but he can't do the homework, and there would be like panic attacks, etc. And I know many of you have experienced this. And full disclosure, my husband was the one to really accommodate him through this because it was incredibly triggering for me, but there were times when I also did this as well. So one of the things we decided to experiment with was partially lowering the demand of the homework so he could access it because he wanted to, while also supporting the learning, right? And this is to say, I was completely on board with no homework for the entire year. And the teachers were open to that as well. Like, he has a nervous system disability. He's already at school. He doesn't need to do homework. This was my perspective, but he wanted to. So what we experimented with for a period of time was like, okay, well, what if we wrote, like we did it verbally, and we wrote down what he said for him, so we're lowering the demand of the writing. What comes up as a future fear? They're never going to learn that they need to write for themselves. They're not going to advance academically, and therefore they're not going to advance in society, and therefore they'll never be independent, and I'm always going to be a maid to my kid, and on and on. Totally normal. Okay, so we experimented with lowering this demand to see, does it reduce the number and duration and intensity of panic attacks that we were having often in our home after school? And does it make it less or more likely that he is going to engage in his homework in any way, right? So what we observed empirically, so what you can see with your own 2 eyes in your home, was that by us writing for him, it actually supported him to do the homework more. And some days he was actually able to do it himself, right? This was obviously in conjunction with his very affirming teachers. So this is difficult to do. I know that includes advocacy, but the experiment was time bound, coming at it neutrally and observing with data in our own home what happens, and then basing our decisions on that rather than fear. Okay? Because fear is going to tell both of us this is the wrong thing to do. It's ridiculous that you're writing for your 9-year-old who already knows how to write physically. He needs to practice the skill, etc. Right? So it's like this framing something as an experiment to collect your own data in a time-bound way is alleviating your anxiety. It's also supporting your partner to get on board for at least trying and collecting data. Okay? So I've already talked about some of those more direct variables or data points that you can collect data on, like the lying, right? Did they, instead of correcting, we experimented with not correcting, and then we saw what happened. Did they come back and tell the truth? Did they, did it open up more conversation about the nature of the truth etc. Did they eat more by letting them eat where they want? Did my son access more of his homework and learn more with the lower demand of writing for him or not, right? So those are directly tied to what we were experimenting with. But we can also track 3 variables to let us know what the nervous system is doing in accumulation for our PDA child or teen. And those are threefold. And I'm going to put them in the order that you're going to see shifts in first. Okay, so first we have connection and engagement. That's the first category. And we're going to operationalize this to show you how to actually track what the data is on a somewhat superficial level, because we're here on Instagram. So I'll do my best to teach, but this is something we go much more in depth with in my live programs. Okay, connection and engagement, nervous system activation, and then basic needs access. Okay, so those are the 3 things that we're going to be looking for as our data. Okay, and you can tell this to your partner, okay, here are the 3 variables. We have connection and engagement, we have nervous system activation, we have basic needs. And then your partner is going to say, okay, what do you mean by that? What are we actually measuring? And you're going to say, I'll tell you. First, let's start with connection and engagement. Okay, so what are some indicators that we can look for that let us know that the nervous system accumulation and stress is coming down in our child and allowing them to have a sense of felt safety with you, connection with you, and communication with you, and trust, which is, in my opinion and belief, the currency for all progress with our unique neurodivergent children. Trust and connection and felt safety. Okay, so what are some of the indicators, the things that we can see with our own 2 eyes in our home that let us know connection is improving, staying the same, or getting worse? Okay, so indicators of connection might be your child organically or spontaneously info dumping or monologuing at you, which if you're neurotypical or more neurotypically conditioned doesn't feel like connection. You're like, they're just talking at me. But this is actually a sign of connection. They're coming in and they're telling you everything about Minecraft, or they're telling you everything about the football players that they've memorized, or they're telling you everything about Beyblades, right? That's a sign of connection. Physical proximity and parallel play. So what this might look like for a younger PDAer is that they want you to sit next to them while they're on their iPad, or they want you to read your book on the floor while they're doing something nearby. For a teen, perhaps, who's been in burnout, what we might see is they're leaving their room for a few minutes and sitting in the room that you're in. Not speaking, not engaging, but just being physically proximate, okay? So we want to understand how those are interacting with the baseline. So with the teen example, if they haven't done that in a month, and you're doing a new experiment for 2 weeks, and within those 2 weeks, they come out and sit in the room with you, it's an indicator or a data point of connection, okay? So we have to start looking for the right data points. Initiating physical contact, right? Squishing against you. It's not necessarily going to be like a reciprocal embrace or petting like you might anticipate, but an example from previous cohorts in the paradigm shift, when they're starting to experiment, a child who sits next to his mom and squishes into her and holds her hand for the first time in 6 months, right? It may feel small looking at it from the outside in, especially if you're not the lead parent, but this is an immense indicator of connection, right? Leaving you gifts, like GIFTS. My son used to leave me little Skittles by my bed, or M&Ms to rank my parenting each day. He would make me things in his ceramics class. I have one of them here. Actually, it's so funny because it's supposed to be a book, but you can see what that might look like. If it's an older PDA researching your interests, sending you an article or letting you know something they learned about something they know you like, right? Like yoga for me. Like even my younger son does this. because I like yoga and meditation, and it's not his interest, but he might tell me something about it. All right, the second category would be nervous system activation, right? So there's two ways to think about this. One is in the moment, and two is tracking over time, okay? So in the moment, like let's take the lying example we talked about. When we correct in the moment or do anything, we can observe what's going on in their nervous system without them needing to say anything, right? And your child's indicators will be specific to them, but you can start noticing, like, do they clench their fist? Do they clench their jaw? Do you see their pupils dilate and get wider to take in more light and information because they're going into tunnel vision? Do you hear a growl or a tonal shift away from like the prosody, the sing-songy voice that they normally speak with? Do you see more tension in their body? Are they like coming in on themselves? These are all indicators that you can agree upon and talk about as like, okay, these are the ways we know our child is having a nervous system response, even if they don't say it and they're not in a full-on fight or flight or in a shutdown. You know, what are their hands doing? What's their jaw doing? What's their mouth doing? What's the tone of their voice? What's their body doing? Are their shoulders coming up, right? Are they retreating in on themselves, turtle shelling? And then the other thing we can track is like the proportion of the day, usually after school or if they're unschooled, like during the day, that they're equalizing, which is like the controlling, manipulative, aggressive behavior towards self or towards others, to get back to a place of nervous system safety and potentially perceive that they're above another to get back to that safety. So like maybe before the experiment, it's like, I don't know, 75% of the day after school, they're equalizing against their younger sibling. It's very distressing. We start the experiment for 2 weeks of shifting things, and maybe it goes down to 60% and 40% regulated, right? So we can actually track this because it's a reflection of cumulative nervous system activation. We can track meltdowns. We can track the duration, intensity, and frequency. So frequency would be, is it every day and now going down to every other day? Maybe it continues to go every day, but the duration of the meltdown is different. So it used to be an hour every day. Now it's 30 minutes. It might be a change in the intensity of the meltdown. It might be, you know, it's an hour every day, but before the experiment, they were attacking you and throwing things at you and trying to hit and bite you. But now, and I know this feels not as like exciting as if you were a neurotypical child and they're not melting down at all, but like instead of attacking you, they're throwing things and screaming, but away from you. Okay, so these are the indicators of progress that we want to look for as part of the experiment that's time bound. Finally, we can look at basic needs access. So what do I mean by that? I mean toileting, eating, sleeping, hygiene, and or safety. So you'll have to identify which of these things is impacted most by the cumulative nervous system of your PDA child or teen. So what can that look like? Let's talk about toileting for a younger and then an older PDAer. So for a younger PDAer, like a young PDAer, maybe they are, you know, they won't pee in the bathroom. They won't even go in the bathroom and they just pee all over the house, right? No matter how much you tell them, you make them clean up, you do the behavioral things, and it's just not getting better, right? And maybe all the therapists have been like, you have to do a behavioral approach, you have to extinguish this behavior, you have to train it out of them, they're lacking the skill. It hasn't worked. So here's the invitation to your partner. Let's experiment with a different logic, right? What if when that happens, we don't say anything, we clean it up, and maybe even focus on signals of nervous system safety. Like we sit on the floor and be like, oh my goodness, like I see that you had an accident. Are you doing okay? Right? And I personally like approach this as a scientist of like, what if? Like, what if we don't know which is best? Like, the therapist might be right. Like, they might need more exposure or a behavioral approach. Maybe that's right for them. But what if we tried something else and just see what happens? So for 2 weeks, maybe we can do this experiment. And then in terms of data, maybe what we see is like, they're still not peeing in the toilet, but they're actually going in the bathroom and peeing around the toilet and sometimes in the bathtub. That's progress, right? It can feel like it's not progress, but that is an improvement. And it takes time to unlearn and undo a lot of this nervous system stress, right? For an older PDA, or, maybe you're a PDA, or you can track for yourself. Like, maybe you have constipation or UTIs because you go into more of a dorsal or shutdown state when your nervous system stress is high. And so maybe like you have a period of time where you can't void, right? And you can track that of like, oh, this is an indicator of what's going on in my nervous system. My metabolism is actually slowing down because I'm going into shutdown where like my heart rate slows and my breathing slows and I'm like, my body's playing dead because I'm perceiving life threat. And of course it's going to impact your digestion, right? That's how it works physiologically. So we track the indicators. With hygiene, this could be like your child or teen hasn't taken a bath for 6 months, right? And, I know that might seem extreme to some of you. To others, it's going to be like, yeah, that's my teen. I just can't admit it because everyone judges me. And it's fine. It's normal. It's often the case in burnout. And so what we want to be doing is experimenting. Like, what if I just energetically for 2 weeks with partner, we let this go and we don't focus on it. Like, let's just rest our nervous systems and see what shifts for the next 2 weeks. And you might see not your child or teen jumping in the bath or shower, but you might see them coming out and be like, I think I want to take a bath next week, right? That's a data point. And they might not be able to do it the next week, but it is enough that we're seeing some progress and movement towards that. And that's why we collect data. For eating, it could be constant eating or what looks like impulsive eating. It could be like severely restricted eating. And we want to see if anything is shifting, even if it's like a level of interest in things shifting from their part. Okay, so for that, and maybe this is you, maybe it's not even your partner, and you're like, I need more evidence. Okay, this is how you collect your own evidence in your own home, because frankly, it doesn't matter what the research says if it doesn't apply to your kid, because the research currently doesn't exist in terms of like a convincing body of evidence about PDA that's like, yes, this is a thing. That doesn't exist yet. Doesn't mean it won't, it just doesn't. Second, even if research does exist, like for example, you might have a study on autistic children and screen time, right? We have to remember that research is based on averages and distributions, meaning like a bell curve or a different distribution, and where your 1 data point or 3 data points of PDA children fit may or may not be what is reported in the average, okay? So we have to think critically as parents and start to allow ourselves to collect our own data through the scientific process. And for many of you, this is a supportive way. I've seen it in my work with parents and couples and families that sometimes if there isn't the evidence that exists writ large in academia, we have to be the scientists and allow ourselves to use the scientific process to frame it as an experiment from a place of neutrality, allow yourselves some trial and error consistently, and collect data using the 3 categories of connection engagement, nervous system activation, and basic needs that you can measure using actual indicators that are relevant to your child. Okay, so if this is something that you want to go more into, this is something we work a lot on in the Paradigm Shift program. I did my best to summarize it for you guys here on the live, and I hope it was helpful to all of you. All right, my friends, have a good Thursday.